Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this, the first in a series of webinars from the Centre for the Advancement of Positive Behaviour Support at Bild. Today's webinar is about Prevent, Teach Reinforcement, a school model for individualized positive behaviour support, and is being presented by Dr. Rose Ivanone. Dr. Ivanone is Assistant Professor at the College of Behavioral and Community Sciences at the Florida Center for Inclusive Communities, which is part of the University of South Florida. Rose is the Director of the Behavior Research Center, the Prevent, Teach, Reinforce project. She's a board-certified behavior analyst and has extensive experience in working with individuals with autism and other developmental disabilities, learning disabilities, and emotional disabilities. I'd just like to quickly remind you that there will be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation, so do send in any questions you have during the presentation. And the presentation slides and handout will be available to download on the Bild website at www.bild.org.uk/CAPS webinars, an address that will appear on the screen at the end of the webinar. I'd now like to hand over to Rose.
Hi, I am going to talk to you today about a functional behavior assessment process, which is an individualized positive behavior support model that we have tested out in the United States called Prevent, Teach, Reinforce. Please remember that we will take questions at the end of this webinar. So as we're going along, if you see something that you say, wow, I need to know more about this, or I'm not quite sure I understand this, use the chat box to enter your question, and then we'll answer all of them that we can at the end. So let's talk about what you're going to learn today. First of all, by the time this webinar is finished, we hope that you'll be able to describe the Prevent, Teach, Reinforce behavior support model, and then maybe be able to tell about some of the components that may make it very successful. So what is Prevent, Teach, Reinforce? So we're going to call it PTR from now on. This was a research project that was funded by our United States Department of Education. It was a 4-year grant, and we tested it out in 3 school districts in the Florida area, and then the University of Colorado Denver was our partner, and they tested it out in 2 Colorado school districts. And the reason this was funded is at that time in the United States, people were concerned about evidence-based interventions. And the talk was that in the behavior world, we really didn't have very many evidence-based interventions. Now, the definition of evidence-based was randomized controlled trials. There have been many studies on single subject design for functional behavior assessment and behavior supports, but no randomized controlled trials. So this was to answer the call for having more rigorous research. And what we wanted to do is take a functional behavior assessment model and see if we standardized it, made it the same across everybody in terms of how we facilitate it, although we still have it flexible and contingent upon the teacher and the team and the parents. Would that be more effective? Well, no, what's typically done in schools. So that was our basically evaluation of a standardized approach. Now in the States, we have what's called a multi-tiered system of supports and positive behavior support. It's a way of making sure that we are successful with all students in any school. And so Tier 1, which is you can see in this triangle, is the green section. That's supposed to get at almost all students. It is the core behavioral curriculum that every student is accessing and every student gets. Some kids, though, won't be successful with that, and that's where you see the sum, which gets a little less green in the close to the top of the triangle. That typically is about maybe 10 to 15% of the students who may need a little bit more interventions that are targeted for groups of kids, maybe like social skills interventions to get better social skill behaviors going, or something called check-in, check-out, which gets more reinforcement of specific expectations and appropriate behaviors. There is then Tier 3, the top of the triangle, and that is where Prevent, Teach, Reinforce is. This is usually, if you have a multi-tiered system of supports, about 3 to 5% of any school's population. And these are the kids who need specific individualized behavior supports in order to be successful. Now, this is a continuum, so these aren't places. So when students are receiving PTR, they should still have access to whatever's going on in the whole school, as well as any of the Tier 2 interventions that might be appropriate for them. So if you have questions on that, put in the chat box. What is our research of PTR? I didn't want to take a whole lot of time going through all the research, because since we have finished our randomized controlled trials, there have been many, many people who have taken PTR and done different things with it. There are 2 randomized controlled trials, and if you're interested, we can always send you the citations. They're at the end. We'll give you all the citations. However, if you have problems accessing any articles and you want them, I'd be happy to provide them to you. The first randomized controlled trial was our original one that we did for students in kindergarten through 8th grade. That was the original PTR research. And that showed more effective outcomes for kids who got PTR versus kids who did not get PTR. The other randomized controlled trial is just finishing up. It is for young children, 3 to 6 years of age, taking the PTR model and trying it out in what we call preschool. And the PI of that research project, Glenn Dunlap, is saying that he is seeing the exact same outcomes we got from the original research. There have been multiple single subject studies since then for kids just in general ed, kids just with autism, in pre-care or child care or daycare settings, with families, and with high school students who have emotional issues. So we're having a lot of nice research arising from this, and it's pretty exciting in that all of them seem to be showing the same outcomes. So the outcomes are that in our randomized controlled trials, we looked at 3 specific outcomes. Did the social skills improve? Did the problem behaviors improve? And did academic engagement, that is, being actively engaged in whatever is going on in the classroom that's instructional related, improve? And both of the randomized controlled trials showed significant improvements with students who received Prevent, Teach, Reinforce compared to students who got business as usual or services as usual. All of the single subject were multiple baseline designs, and in each of them they showed a difference and improvement in behaviors of kids who received Prevent, Teach, Reinforce. We also look at teacher outcomes, and in all of these studies, teachers are implementing the behavior interventions within the Prevent, Teach, Reinforce plan with at least 80% or higher fidelity. And we do social validity assessments, and teachers are finding this process to be very effective and acceptable. We also, in some cases, have the students completing social validity skills, especially those who are older in high school, and they're also finding PTR to be effective and acceptable. So what is the PTR process? It is basically a 4-step process. It is aligned with what we call the problem-solving process that is used a lot in a multi-tiered system of supports. So what we do in a problem-solving process is first we have to identify the problem, and in Prevent, Teach, Reinforce, that's goal setting. We identify what are the behaviors we want to see more of and less of, and then we define them and set up a progress monitoring system so we're going to know how behavior is happening every day. The second step of the problem-solving process is we have to analyze the problem. Why is the problem occurring? In Prevent, Teach, Reinforce, or in any FBA process, functional behavior assessment process, that is the functional behavior assessment. We look at the behavior and try to figure out how it's related to what's going on in the environment, either what's happening right before problem behavior and what happens immediately after problem behavior. The third step then is once we have analyzed the problem, we now can start developing some interventions to resolve the problem. And that's our PTR intervention step. Within that, we also provide the teacher or whoever is implementing the intervention with some support. So we coach and train the teacher, and then we develop some fidelity measures to make sure that we're implementing the intervention in the way we had hoped to have it implemented. And then the final step is we have to figure out, is our intervention having an effect? So we monitor and evaluate response to intervention, and that's our 4th step, which is evaluation. We make database decision-making steps contingent upon how the data are looking. So we're going to go over that process now and exactly how we do this. In PTR, before we even start our first step, we have a pre-step, which is called teaming. Functional behavior assessments in PTR are not meant to be done by one person. It really needs to have several people in order to have the most effective process. This is a collaborative process, and as we go through the steps, you're going to see, as I give examples of how we get these steps completed, that we do a lot with what the teacher and everybody else on the team says versus what the expert may say. We need to have relevant team members. And so what is a nice way of thinking about who should be on this team is thinking about what kind of knowledge you need on the team. So the members need to have at least one person who knows the student really well, who sees the behavior and knows exactly what happens before and after. That usually is the teacher. Could be a paraprofessional or instructional aide, it could be the parent, it could be the bus driver, it could be a principal, it could be a dean, it could be a lot of people, and indeed the student, him or herself. The second is we need someone with knowledge of how to do a functional behavior assessment. Functional behavior assessment is aligned with the applied behavioral analysis principles. And so to have someone who really understands those principles and can facilitate the team to take them through the whole process and keep the science pure while being collaborative is a great skill to have, and sometimes it's hard to find, but you do want to get somebody who does understand that. And the third one is you want somebody who knows the context of the setting. So that could be an administrator, somebody who understands what resources are available, time resources as well, who can help make the behavior intervention plan happen. So once you have your team, you want to be able to know how well your team works together. You want to know who's going to do what. So if there are several people there who know the student, who's actually going to be the one responsible to do the intervention? The reason we do that is because we want to give that person a little bit more weight in making some decisions, because they're the person who's probably going to be doing all of the work. So we have to kind of make sure they're in alignment with what we're thinking and acceptable with what we're thinking. And we also want to come up with a process for agreeing on how we're moving forward. Usually team processes aren't always pretty. Sometimes there's going to be a couple of people who don't agree with what's going to happen. So we want to be able to have a process so even though we may not totally be happy with what's going to happen, we're going to agree to accept and do it so that we can move forward and then evaluate data based on it and come back and make decisions. Rationale for having this attention paid to the teaming part is because the person who is the facilitator is not the one doing the intervention. It is the team or the teacher doing the intervention. And so we need a greater buy-in that's correlated with these collaborative processes. So let's go to the first step, goal setting. The purpose of goal setting is to first say what are the behaviors that are of greatest concern to the teacher and the team, and what do we want to see reduced, less of, and what do we want to see take their place, so behaviors that we want to see more of. We also want to prioritize all of those behaviors. Often we'll have a lot of people with the problem behaviors. And what we'll want to do is say, what do we need to have happen? Do we need to identify, of these three behaviors, which one, if we were able to decrease it, would be the one that would make everybody's day a better day? And with that, then we can define which of those behaviors it is, and then make a clear, measurable, and observable definition. Then we also develop a teacher-friendly baseline data collection system, which they carry throughout the entire process. This is an example of form. There are resources on the website that provide you with every single form you're going to see in this presentation, as well as some extra forms that I may not be showing because of time, but you're welcome to use any of the forms for your own purposes. This is a form that we typically give to the team when we're starting to develop and identify behaviors of concern. The way that we do this in PTR is in two ways. One is we can have people complete this prior to the meeting to save time at the meeting, and usually what we'll ask them in the directions is for each team member to identify 1 to 3 behaviors they want to see less of from the student, and then 1 to 3 behaviors they want to see more of from the student instead of the problem behavior. The other way we can do it is during the meeting. If we do it during the meeting, how we normally do it is we'll first ask the team to take 2 minutes and each person identify and write down 3 behaviors they want to see less of from the student. After the 2 minutes are up, we go in a round robin asking each person to offer one of the behaviors that they have on their paper. And then the facilitator will start listing all of them, usually having some sort of a projector so that all the team can see what the facilitator is doing. Based on this, we get input from everybody, and then we're able to then address which of the behaviors that they've listed are pretty similar to each other, so we can kind of group them, which are unique. And now let's start talking about what do these really look like with the student. And now if we have several behaviors, which one, if we could reduce it, would make everybody's day a better day every single day. And then that's how we prioritize it. Then we do the same thing with the behaviors to increase. We ask the team, now that we have a problem behavior we want to see less of, write down 1 to 3 behaviors each of you would like to see the student do instead of that problem behavior or in place of that problem behavior. And we do the exact same process to get a minimum of 2 behaviors. So to explore this a little more, I'm going to provide one case study so you can kind of get an idea of how the process works with one particular student. You're going to see a student that we're going to call Mike. In the video that you see him, he is 9 years old. He has autism. That ESC there is what we call in Florida special education. It's called exceptional student education. He is in a classroom that's self-contained. Hopefully we would have him in a more inclusive setting. However, when we started working with him, he was pretty much in the same classroom most of the day, and he's with 5 other students, so there are 6 students. All of them have some form or are classified as having autism. Mike is nonverbal, but in the video you'll see him using some sign language. You'll also see him using pictures. And when you see the post-intervention video later on, you will see that he has a voice output device or an augmentative communication device. So he has multiple ways, hopefully, to communicate. His team is his teacher, and then there are 2 instructional aides in the classroom. And then there was a PTR consultant from our project. So you will see a video, and the video that you're going to see, let me set it up a little bit for you so you'll understand what you're seeing. Mike is working first with his paraprofessional or instructional aide. He is one-on-one with her, and you will see he'll have like kind of these, we call them study carrels, but they're things up to so that he feels on his desk that he is kind of not seeing the rest of the class. Now that is a preferred activity for Mike. He likes one-on-one. He likes doing tasks that are very short and discrete and have a real specific beginning and ending. You're going to hear a little signal, which means he's going to transition. He is transitioning to something he doesn't like, which is a group setting with 2 other students and the teacher. We think he doesn't like that because of the attention, and plus he just doesn't like to stop abruptly. The teacher has put in an intervention in this baseline video, but the intervention isn't working well, as you will see. They have decided that if he can transition without screaming, he will get a Skittle. And I don't know if you have Skittles in England, but they're very sweet, sugary treats. You will see in the video, as he's transitioning, he is going towards some cabinets in the classroom. What he's trying to do is get his Skittles. I always say that he's hearing yada, 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 Skittles, yada, 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 Skittles from the teacher, and he's not hearing anything else. So what I want you to do is just look at this video and watch it and kind of see the behaviors he's doing before PTR. Teachers are trying lots of interventions, however, he's still having the problem behaviors.
Good job. All right, I need Quinn and Darren coming here, please. Come on over. Marley, go. 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 sit at the table and tell me that you going to the cabinet is not appropriate. Stand up.
Go to Mr.
Marley, please.
Remember, it's Marley, come
Ken
to
and
me.
Garrett, I am
Right here.
Quinn. I am not going to give them to you. If you want Skittles, you need to go to
Marley
my
Jordan.
table, not the cabinet.
Se llama Marley Papá.
You need to stop hitting yourself on the head. Don't hit me. You need to stop.
Marley, come.
You know what, Kenneth? You've just lost your smiley face. No. When you get quiet, I will start your time. When you get quiet, I will start your time. No, sir. When you get quiet, I will start your time. When you get quiet, I will start your time. Leave them alone, please, Garrett.
So now you can see Mike's behaviors. I don't know if you have kids like Mike in England, but we certainly have quite a few of them here in the United States. I think because autism is ubiquitous, you probably have some kids like Mike. So this just shows you an example of that form you saw earlier. This is what the team, remember there's 3 people on the team besides the PTR facilitator. It is the teacher and 2 instructional aides. They listed 4 behaviors they wanted to see less of: screaming, hitting, getting out of his seat, and bossing his peers was the name they call one of the behaviors. They prioritized the screaming and the hitting. I'm sure you can see why they did that. And you'll look on the right of the table where it says operational definition. Those are the definitions that they gave to screaming. The loud, high-pitched noise that you could hear outside the classroom, so they wanted to get that volume in there. And then hitting is anything regarding touching peers or adults with his open hand, fist, foot, or an object while he's screaming. He tended to only hit when he was screaming. Actually, this is probably more like a chain behavior where he first starts screaming, and if screaming continues, it escalates to hitting. The behaviors they wanted to see more of, they again listed 4, but they prioritized the 2 that are bolded. They wanted to see him transition from things he likes to things he doesn't like, and they wanted him, instead of screaming, to express he was frustrated with a more appropriate way of communicating. And you can see again how they defined it, moving to non-preferred activity, engaging in communication with an inside voice, and then using some sort of communication, we're not sure yet because this is still before we've done the behavior intervention plan, to say he wants either a break or attention. Now that we know his behaviors that we're targeting, we have them defined, we're now going to set up a progress monitoring system. We call this the Individualized Behavior Rating Scale tool, or for short, the iBurst. This is considered an umbrella term called direct behavior rating, or DBR. What we want to do is, we know teachers have a difficult time with direct observation data. Tallying every time a kid does a behavior or setting a timer, even doing interval recording is tough for teachers in authentic settings. They're too busy dealing with sometimes the behavior to remember, oh yeah, I was supposed to tally these, or I was supposed to move my counters, or I was supposed to move paper clips from one pocket to another. And we don't have enough resources to have somebody in every classroom to just collect data. So we wanted to go with something simple but yet that we would be having with reliability. So direct behavior ratings combines rating systems with direct behavior observation. So whoever is directly observing the behavior completes the rating scale pretty close to the time the behavior happens, but that could be at the end of the day. That could be midday. They decide to do a couple of ratings. It could even be the next morning. But what they're doing is they're rating the behavior on their perception of how the day has gone for the behavior, or the period has gone, or the hour, or the morning, depending on the scale that they set up. And so this shows an example of an eye burst for Mike. And I'm going to just explain this scale through the very first behavior, which is screaming behavior. The first thing when we set up the scale, you'll see screaming is that behavior. Remember how we defined it. We do have a key at the bottom, which is on the next slide, so you'll see that in a minute. What we asked the teacher first is if screaming is going to be the behavior we're going to record, how do they want to record it? Do they want to do it over the entire day and just look at screaming based on the day's performance? Do they want to do a morning performance, an afternoon performance? Do they want to go by routine? So we asked the teacher what's going to work best for him or her. This teacher said all day. So she wanted to record at the end of the day how screaming was throughout the entire day. So the next thing we say is, what will be easier for tracking screaming will be the number of times he screams, the number of episodes of screaming, how long screaming lasts, how loud screaming was. This teacher said, I'd like to do episodes, which we went ahead and said times. Now we know screaming episodes. And the video you saw would be an example of one screaming episode for purposes of this eye burst. So the next thing is we then start asking some questions. Think back over the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks. What, on a typical bad day, about how many screaming episodes this might have? We put whatever the teacher says next to the 4 on the scale, because a 4 stands for a typical bad day for problem behavior. This teacher said on a typical bad day we have 7 to 8 episodes. Then we ask, now what will be a terrible day? Must be 9 or more times. Anything more than a typical bad day would be a terrible day. We put that next to the 5. Then we asked the teacher what would be a fantastic day for screaming episodes. This teacher said anything 2 or less times, because they understood that screaming was communication, so they didn't think they could get him to 0 screams, so they were going to be happy if he would scream 2 episodes or less. And we put that at the 1, because the 1 stands for the worst day ever. And then we just split the difference between the worst day ever, which is the 1, and the typical bad day, which is the 4. So in this case, we split between 3 and 6, and we asked the teacher how many times for a good day, which is a 2, and how many times for a so-so day, which is a 3. Now we test it. We ask the teacher, was Mike here yesterday? If the teacher says yes, then we would say, what would you rate him yesterday in terms of screaming? Was it a terrible day, a 5? Was it a fantastic day, a 1? Or somewhere in between? And we ask the teacher to explain what they circle, so we see, first, did the scale work? And second, the teacher understands it. So we do the same for all the behaviors. For appropriate behavior, if you notice, we flip the scale. So rather than the 5 being the worst day ever, 5 is the best day ever. Rather than the 1 being the worst day ever, or best day ever, excuse me. The 1 now is the worst day ever. And the reason we do this is this can become self-graphing. So a teacher can graph this as a hard copy. And what we want to see is problem behavior, graph lines go down, and appropriate behavior, graph lines go up. You can also put this into Excel and make pretty graphs as well. So if you have any questions, remember to please put them in the chat box. I'll be happy to give you answers at the end of this presentation. This is the key at the bottom. So it just is reminding people of the definitions and what the ratings mean. For those of you that are concerned, is this really a reliable instrument? We do have an article that I did list at the end in the very last last slide, where we talk about the psychometrics, the inter-rater agreement of the IVERS. And you can see we have acceptable inter-rater agreements. For this kind of a scale, anything above 0.60 is considered to be acceptable. I also have a student who just recently did some concurrent validity, seeing whether or not, when she went in and did an observation, did what the teacher circled match what actually happened in the classroom, and she got high coefficients in the 70s of that agreement. And that article is in review. It's also listed at the end, so hopefully that'll be published pretty soon, and you'll be able to get access to that. Now we're going to move on to step 2. Now that we know what the behaviors are we want to see more of and less of, we now have to analyze, why is that problem behavior for Mike screaming and hitting happening? And so what we do is the PTR facilitator always goes in and observes. But to get the teacher and the team input, we have a checklist in which we ask them questions about the behavior's occurrence and how it's related to the environment. What the PTR facilitator gets from this checklist is information that is synthesized and then put in what we call a summary statement or a hypothesis statement that the team agrees upon, and then that is used to build the intervention. Now, this is just the first page of the elementary school checklist for children who are in kindergarten through probably 5th or 6th grade, ages 5 to 11 years of age approximately. It's a 5-page form. We have 2 pages that look at what happens in the environment right before. So things like, if you remember Mike's videotape, right before he starts screaming, there's a transition, and the transition is from something preferred to something non-preferred. And it's a non-preferred because he's sharing it with 2 other kids, and it's a longer subject. It's not discrete kind of tasks that he's doing. So we get all that information on what happens right before, so we kind of understand maybe what we have to intervene with to make it less likely for Mike to scream. Then there's a couple of pages to ask, what is the purpose of Mike's behavior? Is he trying to get access to something? Is he trying to get out of or away from something? And then the last couple of pages of this checklist ask, what happens right after this problem behavior occurs? In Mike's case, teachers, you will see in that video that teachers kind of do a lot of verbiage. They talk a lot, they reprimand, they redirect, they eventually say stop it, and then they take him to what's called the think chair. And so they kind of escort him over there. And then we do a little bit of a reinforcer assessment to also see what might Mike like to do, or any student like to do. So we always talked about this. I'm going to skip this slide because I already told you about that slide. And again, the functions of behavior. There are 2. For those of you who aren't familiar with applied behavior analysis and functional behavior assessments, all people do behaviors for primarily 2 reasons. You're either trying to get something. So it could be you're trying to get attention, someone's attention, whether adult or a peer. You're trying to get access to something you like better, an activity you like better than the activity being offered. You're trying to get access to a specific object. For a lot of kids, maybe something another child is playing with. They want that object. And their problem behavior is to get that object. For some kids with autism, it may be they're trying to get access to sensory input or sensory information. The other function is we do behaviors to get out of something, or to get away from something, or to end something, or delay something. So the same things. We might want to get away from a specific activity or delay it. We might want to delay that transition. We're not quite ready to move to the next activity yet. We might want to get away from people or a specific person. We might want to get away from specific object, or for some kids, especially with sensory issues, we might want to get away from some sensory feedback or input. We did write an article about power, control, jealousy, and revenge as functions. In the States, we have a lot of teachers who like to say, he just wants to have power over everybody. He wants to have control. And we want to try to steer people towards those 2, either you're getting or getting out of something, because that's rooted in behavioral analysis, and we can do interventions for those versus power control, jealousy, and revenge functions. So we do have an article. There's a little citation there at the bottom, and I also included it in the citations at the end so that if you want to read that article, you can. If you can't find it, please, again, I'm sure there is a way to let Bild know that you need more information, and they can always contact me to get more resources for you. So let's look at Mike's functional behavior assessment. You can see this is our assessment summary table. These are all the things in the second column there under prevention data. Those are the things the team said happened right before he has screaming and hitting. In the middle column where you see teach data, these are what they think Mike is doing, the purpose of his behaviors. And they really thought that it was primarily get attention because if you see in that final column, they said, you know, we do give him lots of attention when he does his screaming and hitting. And they didn't at first buy that it was an escape function because they said, well, we always make him do the work later on that he gets out of, so we don't think he's really escaping. So there's a little bit of a discussion, of course, in all of these, but that's kind of a little bit of the information they gave for what he does when problem behavior is happening in relation to the environment. We also have a summary of the first or the second column where it says prevention. When don't we see problem behavior? Because that's just as important. So you can see doing independent work, one-on-one attention. Specialist means doing art, music, PE, some of these more fun activities. Mike tends to not have any screaming episodes. What are some things we could teach Mike to do instead of screaming? You can see there's lots of things there that they mentioned. And then the final column is what are some other things that are reinforcing to Mike besides attention and escape? Based on that, this is the hypothesis that we came up with and the team agreed in. We saw that there were two primary categories of antecedents or prevention triggers. So the when is when Mike is A, asked to complete non-preferred tasks like reading and math, stop a preferred activity or transition to a non-preferred activity, or fix something wrong, an error, he screams and hits. There's another set that the teachers mentioned is when the teacher's not paying any attention to him and she is with other students. He screams and hits. Now we think, even though they insist upon attention, you'll see when we start looking at the intervention plan, when you see the post-intervention video, that they did have an intervention in place to address the attention function that did not work. So we had to come back to the drawing board and say, you know, maybe it's a bit more for escape. He really is first trying to delay the transition or delay the non-preferred activity. And while he's delaying and getting away from this, you are giving him lots of attention. We actually call that an escape to attention kind of function or purpose. So the part that's more academically related that he's trying to get away from or delay, we say that is the function for that screaming and hitting. He's able to delay the transition or non-preferred activity. When the teacher is attending to other students and secondarily to the escape function, he's also getting attention from teachers and peers. Now, if you look at the bottom half of this table, we also do an appropriate behavior hypothesis. So what that involves is we take the when and just copy it and paste it in the bottom half. We take the as a result, the functions, copy and paste them. What we change, though, is the he will, because we want the team to understand instead of screaming and hitting to get escape and attention, what we want Mike to do instead is we take those behaviors they identified in their goal setting. We want him to express his frustration appropriately and transition appropriately from preferred to non-preferred tasks. When he does that, we're going to now give him escape. We're going to now give him attention. So we're going to show you how that was done for Mike. We now have to develop the intervention plan. With a hypothesis, a behavior intervention plan becomes much easier to develop. So in Prevent, Teach, Reinforce, they select the interventions. I'm going to show you an example of a menu of interventions that we have. The facilitator just ensures that whatever the team selects matches and works with the hypothesis, so it's aligned with the science. Once we select the interventions, and we only select a minimum of one prevent intervention to address that, when of the hypothesis, one, teach intervention, the replacement behavior that we want to teach him to do. For Mike, we want to teach him to transition appropriately. We want to teach him to communicate his frustration. And then a reinforce. We want to make sure we give Mike his reinforcement, escape and attention, based on performance of the problem behavior. If a team wants to do more interventions than that, they can, but they're not required to. Once they select those interventions that we all agree upon are going to be implemented, we then have the team describe step by step how the intervention is going to be implemented. So we task analyze the intervention. We think that's an important part of PTR because everybody then knows how to do this intervention. And then we train the teacher after the intervention is developed. So we schedule 30 minutes to go over and model and rehearse and role play the intervention. And then once everyone is comfortable, we develop and implement a start date and maybe even train the students in the intervention before we start it in the very first day. So what you see here is an example of the menu of interventions for elementary. Now in your packet, the whole handout packet, you're going to see a lot of versions of many of the forms. We have elementary, so younger kids forms. We have high school secondary, so kids who might be from 12 years to 18 years of age. We have forms for teachers of those students, as well as we have student forms now. So you're going to see all different forms, so whatever age level you're working with, you should be able to find a form appropriate for that. This is an example of the elementary form, though. So the instructions are in each column, in the prevent column and the teach column, the team is asked to select between 1 to 3, a rank order between 1 to 3 interventions that they are willing to do and they think would work. The things with stars are things that has to be implemented no matter what. So they have to do a replacement behavior. And the final column, they have to do reinforcement. We have to reinforce the replacement behavior, and we have to stop reinforcing the problem behavior or come up with a way that we're going to respond to problem behavior so that, for example, Mike no longer gets escape for screaming, no longer gets attention for screaming. So this is an example of task analysis. If you look on the left, we don't just say if the team picked choices, we write, okay, provide choices of where to sit. That's not enough. We don't know how the teacher will do that. They could do it differently every day. Anybody coming in could do that in a different way. It doesn't lend itself to consistency. So instead on the right is an example of that same intervention, but task analyze. So first we say, what are the choices that will be provided to Mike? When are we going to provide the choice? What will we do when he makes the choice? And so that task analysis shows exactly how to do that. And we ask the teacher what's going to work for him or her so that it's going to be comfortable for them to do it. So here you see an intervention plan. You'll be able to read this. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I'm going to go through, though, the little bit of the replacement behavior because you're going to see that in the post-intervention video. So this is a prevention strategy. They chose environmental support. They did something with his visual schedule to make it a bit more predictable, so he wouldn't have to scream when he transitioned. They also selected curricular modification, which they really wanted, instead of abruptly doing a transition, to maybe allow a little bit of time for Mike to kind of ease into the transition by doing something preferred before he has to transition to something non-preferred. So another little quick task. Here you see his replacement behavior. You're going to see this on the videotape. So what they wanted to do is say, have him communicate his need to calm down. And at that point, he had what was called a tech talk, which is a voice output device. So they programmed his device to say, I need to calm down. And how they were going to do this is right before the transition from preferred to non-preferred, they were supposed to remind him, if you see in step 2, that he can say to the aide or the teacher, I need to calm down. Now, as soon as, right after the transition happens, as soon as he starts to get upset, and that really is like initially Mike would do a little squeal before he gets into a big scream, they are to hand over hand present him again with the tech talk and say, remember, you need to say you need to calm down, because they want to teach him this is when you should be telling me you need to calm down. And if he doesn't do it independently, they do hand over hand to have him press the button that says I need to calm down. Immediately after he says I need to calm down, step 4, he then has a choice of how he's going to calm down. One of the choices is the tent. That's his escape choice. So rather than going to the transition, he can go to the tent for a little while instead of transitioning right away. Another choice is he wants attention, so he wants a pat on the back. Another one is he may want a cush ball, which is a sensory. So the teachers wanted to do everything, even though we thought it was more for escape, they wanted to cover everything. So once he says, I need to calm down, he then has to say, now what does he want to do for calming down? As soon as he's calm, makes his choice, you'll see in step 5, we give them a statement there to say, thank you for telling us what you need to calm down. So we're giving him some attention for doing something more appropriate. We're going to do it very calmly here, though. Then we'll allow him, if it's like he goes to the tent, he can stay in the tent for a minute. Now, the teachers were concerned when we did this and said, what if he stays in the tent the entire time and never comes out? We didn't think that would happen, but instead of saying, oh, that won't happen, we said, so let's think about this. We know he likes attention. So number 7 is if he stays in the tent for more than a minute, then what we're going to do is have a party, have a lot of fun, and he won't be able to stand being in that tent for much more than that. And then you'll see the reinforced interventions is really those reinforce that replacement behavior. Every time he says, I need to calm down, what are we going to do? So you are now going to see his post-intervention video. What I want you to do is look at this video. It's the same situation as the baseline. He's transitioning from preferred to non-preferred. The other thing I want to tell you about this video is this video was done the very first day they did the intervention with Mike. And this happens after a week or so of doing an intervention that didn't work, which was the attention one. So I want you to see how quickly this intervention worked. You will see some screaming because his aide's a bit kind of hesitant or timid, and she doesn't do the intervention correctly. But the teacher comes in and goes through the entire intervention exactly as it's supposed to be implemented. And you will see how long Mike stays in the tent because he chooses the tent, and how quickly he comes and transitions. And comparing the time this took to the first video, probably will get you thinking about, wow, this is a really fantastic thing.
Amazed intensely.
Nice job.
Screaming.
What do you need? What do you want? What do you want? Go ahead, quickly. Thank you for making a good choice and telling us what you need to calm down. You stole the rest of the taffy, didn't you?
No. What?
Hurry up, Kenneth. Marley, please don't touch. Sit down. Just sit down. Thank you for coming over. Get out, please.
So you saw that video, and you saw that intervention, which is very simple actually, worked really well the very first time it was given to him. Now, the teacher, before she did that, and even the aides, went through some training and coaching. We have a form that we take the intervention and we break it down into its components. So an example, providing choices. On the left, it's task analyzed. On the right would be the primary adult behaviors we would see if we were observing this intervention being implemented. So we make it a little shorter. And then we can put this into a checklist that can be used not only as the training checklist, so we put it in front of the teacher, we go in there and let's say, let's go over the choice-making intervention. Now, let's go ahead, I'll be the teacher, you be Mike, and I'll go through the way it should be done. Now, let's switch roles. And so we practice a little. And there's a way you can check then, say, did the teacher do each of these steps? Then during the actual intervention, you can then, as you can see here, the fidelity sheet as well, you can take fidelity on whether or not the teacher did each of these steps. This could also be done as a self-assessment. The teacher can just check off, yes, I did these steps, no, I didn't. In our project, and as we're doing this outside of the research in a lot of different states, there's a lot of different people, they like this because they call this their cheat sheet. Instead of having a long behavior intervention plan, they have the core components and they're able to remember after a day or so, yeah, I know what to say in each of these. They also like that final column there where they get to say, what do they think is the impact of each of these intervention strategies? For Mike, how well is that schedule working for him? When we now come back and look at data, we can get their input and they think this intervention really is necessary. Is Mike getting so much better that we can start fading parts of these intervention steps? So our final step then is we need to look at data to determine whether or not what we're doing is working. We usually do this within 3 weeks of when we implement the intervention so that we can come through by and see, first of all, is student behavior getting better? And is the plan being implemented with fidelity? So we look at two main data points. If the plan is working and we still are going to do stuff, we might decide continue to plan for a little while longer and see if things stay. We might say, okay, the plan's working well. We can start maybe making the plan less cumbersome, so maybe we're going to take out some steps or take out one of the interventions, like maybe the visual schedule doesn't need to be done any longer because the student knows the schedule now, or just doing one step of this. Or we might start generalizing. We're only doing this plan during one routine. Let's now do it in a couple of other routines. We might do it with another classroom or another teacher. We might do it at home. We might say, well, you know, the behavior scale, we used to have Mike having a fantastic day if he screamed 2 times or less. We now want to make the goal different. Our new goal is going to be he has to scream 1 time or less for it to be a fantastic day. We might shape the behavior by saying this behavior now has to look totally different, or we might even come up with a different behavior we want to target. If the behavior plan isn't working, if the child behavior is not improving, the first thing we're going to check is the fidelity. Did the plan get implemented with fidelity? If yes, then we might have to go back and look at our hypothesis. Do we have the wrong function? Do we have the wrong conditions? This happened with Mike. Although we had a hypothesis, the teacher and team really agreed and felt strongly that attention was his primary function, but it wasn't. It was actually escape. So we had to change his replacement behavior intervention to teach him a way to get escape, which is calming down and picking a tent to calm down, so allowing him to escape to replace the screaming. So those are some things you might do, or you may have to gather more data. It depends really upon your team and your data. So this kind of talks about all that I just said. We have in here now Mike's scale. So this is his I-burst, and this is an Excel version of their data point. So very easy to put into an Excel spreadsheet. This is his screaming behavior. Now the first part, where you until you see the first phase line, that's that first vertical dotted line, that's his baseline. If you recall, a 5 means it's a terrible day for screaming, 9+ times of screaming episodes. The 1 means a fantastic day, 2 or less episodes of screaming. So you can see in baseline, we don't have any fantastic days. We have a few good days there. And, this is very common. Sometimes kids come in and there's a good day and people think maybe their medication was fixed or something. That's not always the case, but for some kids, some days are better than others. But you can see in general, we have mostly 4s and 5s, which are typical bad days and terrible days, and 3s are so-so days. Now, that first phase line is his baseline. Then you're going to see right after that is when we started doing the PTR plan. Now, the first about 7-8 data points, they look exactly like baseline. That is showing us that attention-based intervention that the team first did not work. So when we came back and met and looked at that data, we said we have to change the plan because the teacher was implementing the plan perfectly. So it wasn't Fidelity, it was a bad plan. So if you look where you see the first data point down where the 1 is, that is, we should have actually put a phase line there to show we changed the intervention. That is when we did the intervention that you saw on the video clip. Immediately that day, they had a fantastic day. And as things happen after a few days, it went a little bit up. He had a couple, maybe extra screaming episodes because teachers do start dripping, and they only were doing this plan during transitions. So there were some other routines going on that they were not doing the plan in. But you can see there's a nice, except for one blippy day there that went up to a 4. I'm not quite sure why that happened. But Mike's screaming is definitely improving. That second phase line you see there, you will see a little arrow that says the definition change. At that point, when we reviewed the data, the team decided that they wanted to change the definition of screaming. Screaming used to be that high-pitched screaming. They said what he's doing now is he's doing squealing mainly, and we want to stop the squealing. So we want to make sure that squealing now is part of the definition. We want to address that squealing. So now what they have to do is in their intervention, they have to make sure they redirect Mike to say, I need to calm down before he even starts squealing. And then we ran out of time because the school year ended. But you can see Mike's screaming got much better. This is his hitting. Hitting, remember, 5 is a terrible day, 1 is a fantastic day. Actually, hitting went away once they started the new intervention where you'll see those data points after the first phase line are starting to be mostly in the 1s. He rarely had a hitting episode because the screaming was so reduced, he no longer had a need for hitting, and that made everybody's day so much better. Now, this is the appropriate behavior. This is transitioning from preferred to non-preferred. In this case, remember, we flipped the scale, so 5 is a fantastic day, best day ever. 1 is a terrible day. So you can see expressing his frustration appropriately was not so great at baseline, not so great immediately with the attention intervention right after that first phase line. But when we started that intervention you saw on the video clip, you can see that there were then a lot of fantastic days and good days, with that only one blip on that one day that went back down to a very bad day. So we have a nice trajectory here of he's using his replacement behavior. And transitioning from preferred to non-preferred, that was an intensity scale where a 5 is he does it just with just a whimper or a squeal, and a 1 is he's doing it with screaming so loud you can hear it almost in the playground or outside the classroom. And you can see at baseline lots and lots of that high screaming or kind of variable but still several days of that bad screaming. And then after the intervention, specifically after we did the escape maintained intervention, you're seeing lots of 5s there. He's having great days where the screaming during transitioning is barely a whimper or a squeal. So we're at the end of our presentation. Just a review of this whole process. It's multiple steps, it's team-based, and it is a model of functional behavior assessment. It is a prescriptive or standardized process. Everybody who does PTR does the steps in the same way. They have the same processes where teachers select the interventions, the team selects the target behaviors and provides the definitions for them and prioritizes them. All plans include 3 components: at least one to prevent, one to teach, and one to reinforce. All plans are task analyzed, and then support is provided to teachers after the intervention is designed so that it can be implemented correctly. This is, to date, the publications, research publications as well as manuals. There are 2 manuals right now, one for the kindergarten through 8th grade population, one for very young children. A family-based PTR manual is coming out. So for those of you who want to work with families, that should be coming out soon. We are revising the first 2010 Prevent, Teach, Reinforce manual, the main one, calling it second edition. So that's going to be out, probably it's going to be a while because we still have one more chapter to work on before and revise before we give it to Brooks. There's many, many articles, and not all by the research team, so it's getting exciting. A lot of people are picking this up and trying it. So at this point now, we're going to take your questions. Hi. I hope everybody enjoyed that PTR presentation. This is Rose Ivanone. And there are a few questions that came in, and a few more that came in. So I'm going to go ahead and spend some time answering some of the questions that have come in. Several of you talked about, can this be used with people with learning disabilities? And I know that there is a difference in how we define learning disabilities from the United States and the UK and other countries. So just to let you know that this is a model of functional behavior assessment and a behavior intervention plan model. And FBA BIPs have been researched on just about any age level, any disability level, any kind of problem behavior that you can think of. So it is very appropriate to be used with people who have learning disabilities as well as people who are adults with learning disabilities, because there was also some questions, can this be used with adults? Has this been tested with adults? It has been used with adults. We don't have research yet. That's the one thing we do not have, is a controlled experiment on using the PTR model with adults. But there are a lot of people who have been trying it out and are using it as applied practice. And I encourage, when I hear about that, I encourage them to let me know or give me data or maybe talk to me about getting data so that we can get this research at all ages. So hopefully that helps answer the question about doing it in settings with students who have learning disabilities, or working with students who have learning disabilities, or working on having this work with adult learners. The second question that came up is, are you able to use these resources in your company? I have given these resources freely to Bild to put on their website, and because they're downloadable for you, you are welcome to use these in whatever settings you wish. We did this research for the purpose of disseminating it, meaning we want people to use this, and we encourage you to use it, and also to ask any questions if you come across something that you're not sure, how exactly am I supposed to do this? So you're welcome, and I think they may still be in Word version. So if there's anything you want to modify on those forms and make them to match your context, you can certainly do that. We have another question, was Mike able to manage similar transitions without undesired behavior? That's a great question. He did well with the transitions, and because the intervention during our research, in which you saw in the videotapes, was implemented during his transitions from things that were preferred, which were those little one-on-one, you doing these very easy, very detailed tasks that we know exactly when it starts and when it ends. And when he had to transition to those non-preferred things like small group tasks, he would then have those problem behaviors. So they applied those transition interventions that I need to calm down. This is what I need to calm down during transition. So he did really well in the transitions. Now, where they didn't do the intervention are some of those other routines throughout the day in which he had screaming. Often, when we do this work with teachers in classrooms or people who are working with individuals who have disabilities, it's really hard to think about, I have to do an intervention throughout the entire day. Because that's an awful lot of work, and now I'm overwhelmed. So we often say pick one routine or one antecedent that really, if we could, address that time and make problem behavior be irrelevant and replace it with an appropriate behavior, it may spread to the other times, or will at least make the day be so much better you feel it would be feasible for you to do it in other settings and other activities. And that's typically how we go about doing that. So hopefully that answered your question. And then I think there are no other questions, it looks like, from the audience. You free to do, you have a chance to do a couple more. One of the things that I did put up, probe that maybe you guys hadn't thought of is, and again, I don't know about the UK and other countries and how well you have applied what we call a multi-tiered system of support, which is we look at behavior supports for 100% of the students. And that's where you hear things about positive behavior support and school-wide positive behavior support. We have 3 tiers. Mike is an example of a student who needs an individualized support. And so that is tier 3. We also have strategies for all kids, universal strategies. That's called tier 1. And that would be having expectations and rules and reinforcement systems and consequence systems developed that is applicable to 100% of the students or individuals in any setting. We also have supports that are labeled tier 2 supports. Those are for individuals who might need a little more than universal supports, but aren't probably doing behaviors at the point where they need to be having the resources spent on individualized support. So for some of you, when you think about, you bring a group of students or individuals together to maybe do a social skills lesson because they have a little more need in showing appropriate social skills or being taught appropriate social skills. You might have a small group who come in for counseling to be able to deal with anxiety or deal with some issues that may prevent them from being more stressful. Those are examples of what we say are tier 2 strategies that addresses a small group of students and helps enhance appropriate behavior. What you saw is a tier 3 intervention. Again, it's individualized. Now, how this works in that multi-tier system of supports, which we talked about in an earlier slide, I believe, is that if you have all 3 tiers going on in your setting, you more likely will have a lot more time to spend in these individualized interventions because they take more time because they're individualized, and you have to have the time to work as a team and plan for it, and then implement it and then evaluate the data to see whether or not your plan is effective. And then as you start fading the plan and start reducing maybe those individualized strategies, there's other strategies in tiers 2 and 1 that are still being delivered that can help make sure that it's maintained and that appropriate behavior continues to be reinforced. I think another question came in. Do you suggest that parents try this for behaviors at home? Excellent question, Kate. Yes, there actually is. We have a couple of books out on Prevent, Teach, Reinforce. Now, you do not need to buy them in order to do the strategy, but there is one that has been written for doing this for families, in the family setting. And I know that there's been a couple of pilot studies of doing PTR in the family setting. And one of those resources that was listed in the slide that talked about the research, one of those is actually a student of mine who did PTR in the home setting with a couple of parents and came out with very nice outcomes. In fact, the parents with the second problem behavior were able to do it more independently without the help of the student. So they learn quite a bit from going through the process with the first child. So yes, definitely it can be and should be used and taught to parents. Again, it's an FBA BIP model, and parents have been able to do FBA and BIPs in the home setting. They may need some assistance with some of the process, but they can certainly do this in the home. And I think those were the primary questions that I received from the audience. So I'm going to ask Peter what if we will now conclude this.
Thank you, Rose. On behalf of Bild and the Centre for the Advancement of Positive Behaviour Support, I'd like to thank Dr. Rose Ivanone for that fascinating presentation. Can I just remind everyone that the slides for this presentation and the substantial handout, which is an editable Word file, which is full of information about the Prevent, Teach, Reinforce model for individualized positive behavior support, is available to download from the Bild website at the address which I hope you're seeing on the screen now. Yes, you are. That's good. But you can also go to the Bild website and click on the large webinars advert on the front page. This webinar in full will also be available there later, probably towards the latter part of next week, to watch again in full if you wish to. And on that page is also information about all the other webinars in this series, and registration for the next webinar, 15th of September, by Sharon Paley and Kirsty Jamal from the Department of Communities in Queensland, Australia, on identifying and defining restrictive practices, will open shortly. We look forward to you joining us for that one too. But finally, thanks again to Dr. Rose Ivanone for our presentation today. Goodbye.